Most of the CEOs, the Jamie Dimons of the world, the Brian Moynahans, from what I understand, they all are resigned to Mamdani.
You got the mining people getting out of it, and you have the people speculating on the actual physical commodity.
I mean, that's another one you called right on the money.
Right on the money. This is another stock where we are very, very, very good. I would say it's not an exaggeration to say we're the best at it.
Welcome to another riveting edition of Risk and Return, the podcast for the masses who want to know how to trade, how to invest, what to do with their future in this crazy economy. I'm Charlie Gasparino from Fox Business and the New York Post. I'm with my partner in crime. I say that with air quotes, crime, because we're not criminals. Bob Sloan, the daddy of data, the managing partner of S3 Partners. And if you don't get it, demand it. It's the best research around. We have a great show today. It's just going to be me and Bob just crunching numbers and talking various news stories. But before we start, I have to say, Bob, you have your S3 vest on, fleece on. I know you're representing S3. I usually do that, but today I'm representing, see if you can get it, if you can see that, Missouri, the University of Missouri Journalism School, my alma mater. I figured because why not just say where I learned to be the biggest pain in the ass in journalism. It was at the University of Missouri Journalism School. Before we get into my stuff, we're going to start with your stuff because yours are the actionable ideas.
Well, Charlie, thanks for the great intro as always. I love the Mizzou Tigers. Love that. And we had a Tiger of a week last week. We really did.
Oh, you had a great, by the way, you had a great week last week. Why don't you go through some of those? Tout yourself a little bit there, but
So we had a bearish call on Schlumberger, and that was down 1%. But we had a very bullish call on Halliburton. That was actually up 11% last week. So we're back on track. Really good week. And we've got some interesting picks this week. So we're going to shift from energy to industrials and autos. So one of the more bullish picks we have is Union Pacific, obviously the railroad group, and then also Ford. Ford's an interesting one because there have been some active shorts built up in the last couple of weeks. And what we're seeing is if there's any good news coming out of the earnings call, there's probably going to be an updraft in the stock. And it's the same thing in Union Pacific. It's been, the pricing is weak in rail volumes, but you see the shorts kind of pressing into the stock. And if guidance at all stabilizes around freight demand, we see updraft for Union Pacific. So bullish calls this week, both coming out on Thursday for Union Pacific and Ford. And those are our picks for the week.
now, when you say bullish, you think that this is an anti-short. This is not a short play, right?
Oh, correct. No, this is saying we think stock price is going up.
Okay, now both are facing headwinds, presumably because of tariffs, I would think, right? I mean, is that the sort of fundamental story here?
I think here's the thing. We don't give a hoot about fundamentals. We look at, we really don't. We really don't. I mean, we're citing some of the things that we think that will move the positioning and move the technicals. And that's how we make the market calls. And again, these are not, we're not telling you what to do. This is what the data tells us, and that's how we're relaying. It's not investment advice.
Although the fundamentals may give you an insight, obviously, into why the short position is building up. Obviously, right?
Well, that's right.
Right.
That's right. And so what we're saying is the shorts, the amount of research that goes into a short position is way, 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 way more, right? At least it should be, and usually is, than a long position. It takes 5 times the time. It takes an incredible amount of capital. It's very risky. And so our feeling is, well, the short position is telling you a lot of what's in that particular stock, not all. We don't believe in necessarily the Eugene Fama school where, everything, all piece of information in the stock. So, one of the more interesting things about that is that you think about efficient market theory. When they were doing, Black-Scholes models, The folks that were actually designing the models would send the stuff to Wall Street. So the minute you sent the model to somebody else, it's not efficient, right? Someone's using it and someone's not. So
You arbitrage it right out of existence,
yeah,
right?
yeah, no, exactly. So the whole thing that all the information is in stock, I think that's been pretty well debunked. We don't have to go over that. But in this particular case, we do think is instructive, given the risk and given the time it takes to actually put these positions on. If you look at short interest, it's telling you what the fundamental thesis is. It's telling you why, it's not hard to say, hey, what's going on with the railroad stock? Okay, the freight volumes are down. All right, fine. It's not that difficult. But any switch in that affects the market positioning quite a bit. And when you have pressing shorts into a situation like that, you get any type of good news, we think it's set up for a rally in that stock. And the same thing with Ford. If there's any good news on their EV line, the stock's probably gonna move up on that news. So those are our picks this week, and it's earnings season. We went pretty much a lot of the summer making these picks. Now we're back into it. You'll hear from us regularly, and if we have good ones, we put them on air.
By the way, speaking about EVs, how's Tesla doing these days? Let's look at and I just wonder if we can extrapolate something here, you know?
Well, Tesla is an interesting one because I thought you were going to go and say the return of the meme stock because
Ah, okay.
okay, right, and you look at something like Beyond Meat, which has had an incredible run over the last couple of days. If we could bring that up, I know we're going a little bit out of order, but if we take a look at Beyond Meat, you see the short interest has been pretty steady rising. Look at the rally in the stock. And by the way, it's been up again today. So this is already old. The stock's up something like 10,000%. So the short sellers went from making money to losing a lot of money very quickly, and they're going to lose more money. So we had this pegged at a squeeze risk of 100, I want to say for the last 3 weeks. We
Yeah.
knew we knew that, and this goes back to what we were talking about before with how we make calls, fundamentals versus positioning. You understood the positioning in this stock with the stock price being what it is, that any slight movement up was a tinderbox. That's exactly what happened. So now the stock's up, way up, and from what I think was down to like 30 cents or 40 cents. Now it's up to it might have printed $9 today. So it's a very, very, very volatile stock. Squeeze risk was there. If you had the data, you looked at our data, we actually published some research about this a couple weeks ago. This is another stock where we are very, very, very good. I would say it's not an exaggeration to say we're the best at it. When we understand that type of positioning, when short sellers are losing money and the float shrinks and you see short interest rise, and there's all these different factors that come into it, plus the return of retail. And I just did a conference at a probably the most famous investment bank there is, and certainly the most well respected. And all people want to talk about was retail and what is retail doing on the short side, and how does that happen? So um, it's definitely back, and I think even with some of the crypto price movements, people feeling very bullish, speculative excess is here, and it finds itself into these stocks.
Yeah, yeah. We should point out that Tesla's earnings will be out, but when this run, before this runs, it's out as it's going to be out as we finish this podcast, and they are expecting an uptick in EV delivery. So we'll see where the interest goes. It's interesting. You've been talking about gold lately. Gold got crushed the other. I mean, what happened? I mean, was it just a sell? It was just too frothy and people bailed a little bit. Took some profits.
Well, exactly. We had highlighted the difference between the mining, the gold mining ETF and the actual commodity, and we said, this is really interesting. You got the mining people getting out of it, and you have the people speculating on the actual physical commodity.
I mean, that's another one you called right on the money.
Right on the money. And so if you look at the data today is really telling you what research and fundamentals still tell you, but it's a larger market share of what's happening. I'm not saying fundamentals are to be ignored. On the contrary, it's a mix between the two. And that was a classic example of a technical uh, flow of money really telling you that, maybe gold here was just overdone. And that's exactly what happened.
And just one fundamental thing to throw out to our audience. There's two theories on tariffs, which Trump has been instituting and deinstituting and instituting, is that they're both inflationary. Some people say they're inflationary, some people say they're recessionary, some people say they're flag stationary, which is a combination of both. But if they turn out to be more recessionary than inflationary, which is very much the case, then gold is definitely, from a fundamental standpoint, way overvalued at this
Way,
point.
way over, you know, it was a funny thing. We had a great guest on last week. We were talking about the movement of money and why that's so important. And this is one of the things gold is telling you that people are just nervous, right? They're nervous
Yes.
about, Putin walking away from an Alaska deal and what that means, right? There was a deal teed up for him. He walked away from it. There's all these things going on with China. These are big moving block, seismic fault lines in the world. And when you start touching that stuff, it makes people really nervous, right? And all of a sudden you talk about the debasement trade and this and that. It got overdone.
And then when you get some disclosure and some daylight into those questions, some potential answers, the market sorts out itself, which it's been doing, I think, lately.
And gold too, by the way, just one other thing to add to that is the whole idea here is, and I think what the Trump administration is doing and doing well, is to keep money moving. They want to keep money moving, keep the velocity moving without it breaking the system, right? You don't want to slow velocity down so much that the money system actually stops. And that's what happened in 2008. The money system stopped.
Oh yeah, stop. People stopped lending. They wouldn't lend. No one was lending to anybody.
No one was lending to
As
anybody.
Jimmy Kane
Money
once
wasn't
told
moving.
me.
Right.
Jimmy Kane had the best quote at the time. The former CEO of Bear Stearns, which, as you know, was the first firm to go under. He goes right before he went under. He told me nobody is lending to anybody.
That's right. And that's the thing. It's lending, but it's also when do I get my money? And if those two things slow down, that's recession and that's deflationary. So I think there's a real balance. Seeing gold rise up, people got very, very, very nervous. It is nerve-wracking when you have Venezuela in the picture. We had Robert Koenigsberg. I don't know if you've been following after he was on our show. He's been making some great comments about what's happening there. And, it makes the system unnerved. And so that expresses itself in gold. But
I thought I saw a headline today where they blew another boat out of the water. So
blew another boat out of the water. So
shouldn't laugh about that, but it's serious because it's serious business. But Trump is dead serious in trying to stop fentanyl from coming to the United States. And he's the one, people have been talking about this use of military in that capacity for a long time. He's finally pulled the trigger, so to speak.
Well, here's the thing that's kind of interesting to me, right? Gold didn't react one iota when China was making a move in the South China Sea, when China was actually attacking Filipino boats, when China is using these man-made islands to establish and extend their reach. Gold didn't react $1. When the United States, seemingly being challenged, it goes berserk. And if you want to understand world leadership, I think that is a really interesting observation. And I just thought about that as we were talking about it. But to me, it tells you who holds the confidence. We do.
Well, it also says that there could be that Trump is confrontational, and when China was doing it with the Philippines and taking all those islands and doing all the stuff that they were doing in their sort of sphere of influence, we didn't say boo, right? Now it's literally like we have a show of American might, and war is something that leads to people buying gold. Let's face it, always has
No
been.
doubt. No doubt about it. So it's just interesting that when the United States decides to take very aggressive action, and as you said, fentanyl is a problem. It's one of the saddest things in New York City when you're in New
Oh,
York City and you see people you know are just whacked out. It's
it's just
terrible, and you
all
want
over.
to help,
It's
and
all
we don't
over
even know
Midtown
how
now.
to help.
And it's going to get worse, Bob, which we'll talk about later when I hit my headlines. I guess from a sort of a volatility standpoint, the gold trade isn't going away then, right? If you were to,
How can it? You got people so in the money, they're playing with the house's money. The question is, what do they do with it?
and
And
we're not going to have it's, and just the very nature of the Trump presidency is always going to be volatile.
it's always going to be volatile, right? And he loves the volatility. One of the things that's interesting to me is that he's made some great calls,
Yeah.
right? He's told the marketplace, well, I don't know, if I were you, probably buy some here.
I mean,
So
he said
it's
buy crypto. He
it,
goes, if I get elected, buy crypto because I'm deregulating it, and
yeah,
I'm going to get into the business. My kids are going to get into business. I don't see that as being like the mother of all scandals that he's getting into a business he's regulating because he told everybody he was going to do it,
he told
and
everybody he
people
was going to
still
do it.
elected him.
So whether that's investment advice or not, whatever, but but but
Or just reality.
it's just an observation, right? He's making an economic observation, saying, "Look, this is something that's a real thing, and here's my opinion on it. So, do with it what you want." And one other thing I want to point out before we get to Gaspo's headlines is just these are interesting that we've seen a lot of shorting activity in some of the biggest BDCs, which is Ares and Hercules and some of the KKR stocks, and the short sellers in this community are actually up about $130 million or so. When you come out and you look at some of the headlines of what's been actually lost by some of these banks, yes, there's a massive investigation going around in First Brands. We understand that. We don't want to comment about that. But some of the numbers that have come out and said, here's our exposure, have been pretty small. And so whether you believe that or not, they're on the tape as saying our exposures are pretty small, $50-75 million, easily digestible losses for any investment bank. Not that that doesn't hurt, but it's not 2 or 3
We're
billion.
not talking about 2008
Yes, this is not
mortgage
this is not
mortgage
15,
backed
20 billion
securities, right?
dollars. It's something digestible. And with that, I think that's a good place to stop. And let's get to Gaspo's headlines.
Well, we're on the eve of a mayoral debate, and when this runs, the mayoral debate will be the final one will be over between the Maoist Mamdani, Zohran Mamdani, Andrew Cuomo, the independent candidate, and Curtis Sliwa, the Republican candidate. And I'll tell you this, Bob, everybody that I know in the financial business, from the top to the bottom, particularly in the C-suite, thinks this thing is over. It's Mamdani's is going to win. That even if Curtis Lewa, who's been painted as the spoiler because he's taking 15% of the vote that would presumably go to Cuomo, the independent, even if he drops out, it shows that Mamdani's still like ahead, maybe in the margin of error in some places, but still ahead. And as you know, he beat Cuomo on a one-on-one in the Democratic for the Democratic nomination. So most of the CEOs, the Jamie Dimons of the world, the Brian Moynihan's, from what I understand, they all are resigned to Mamdani becoming mayor. Now, wouldn't you normally think they would be freaking out if a Maoist would become mayor? I mean, he's obviously said that he's going to, raise their taxes, raise the business tax, homelessness, free bus rides, which are going to become mobile homeless centers, shelters, if you know anything about the way this city works. Defund the police in various ways, maybe not per se defund, but in action defund, turning cops into social workers, things of that nature. Stuff that would lead to higher crime and maybe worse living conditions for their workers, and none of them are freaking out. As a matter of fact, they're reaching out to Mamdani, and it's not because they like him or trust him or think he's not going to do what he says he's going to do. The government-run grocery stores. It's mainly because they are saying, listen, this city and state have been moving in this direction for years. Andrew Cuomo, when he was governor, raised taxes. We already, I guess, a piece behind California. Here in New York, have the highest, if you, particularly if you live in the city, you have, the second highest, income tax levy from city and state in the country. We have lousy business conditions. And guess what? The banks have moved in many ways and will continue to move out of the city. Now, this was a number that I found interesting, but it's been written about. I should know this because I cover banks. I've been covering banks for 30 years. JP Morgan right now has more employees in Texas than it does in New York City. So JP Morgan, if you go through Midtown Manhattan, as you and I do all the time, has this gleaming,
Beautiful
multi-story
building.
multi-billion, I think it's a $3 billion building in Midtown Manhattan. I believe it's on 40, I want to say 45th Street. I could be wrong, but it's right there. Um, it's, I mean, it's just like a magnificent place. And it is, it still has more employees in Texas right now. And Goldman is
But the
moving.
high paying ones are here.
Maybe, but increasingly they're moving them over there because there's a stock market in Dallas now, and there's lots of deals to be done in Texas and in the Midwest. Goldman has moved a lot of bankers to Utah. I think it's Provo, Utah. They have a very big hub out there. Bank of America's office, is in Texas. Goldman's in Texas. Um, they're in Florida, obviously. So there's been an out migration in jobs, and I think the sort of basic feeling is that these are New York is yesterday's news, and we've been limiting our exposure to New York for a long, long time, and we're going to continue to do so. And so I think that's why you see Jamie Dimon actually has called Mamdani. This broke in the Times. I've gotten to confirm they had a brief, like 3-minute conversation or something like that, where Jamie said, "Listen, I'm here for you if you need me." I hope he didn't mean I'm here for you if you need me to raise taxes of Bob Sloan and Charlie Gasparino, but he did say
I,
he did say that.
we're both on the record. By the way, all this stuff that came out much later, we had nailed all these things. I was
Sure.
just, I watched the debate, um, and the debate, and it's really disappointing.
Yeah.
Andrew Cuomo can't summon the energy, and he doesn't even look like he wants to be mayor of New York.
And
Excited about New York City, and it just doesn't come through.
I'm disappointed in Curtis, who's a guy I've known for many years and really like personally. I mean, when during the first debate, when Mondami corrected Curtis and how he said his name, I would have said, "Excuse me, I should be calling you Fidel because you do this, do that, do this, do that." And Larry Kudlow told me that he told Curtis to say that, like call him Fidel, and he didn't. And I think I think at this point you got to get really personal with this guy because he's personal with you, and he's not like somebody that average New Yorkers need in their lives right now, given all what's going on. And I think I understand the impetus of people saying Curtis should drop out because Cuomo is the lesser of two evils. But Andrew Cuomo has not like repented from what he did in his last couple of years as governor, and I don't mean nursing home deaths. He was not responsible for that. We can spend all day. I can unpack that for you. My brother's a doctor he runs Brooklyn Hospital. He'll
Why
tell you.
doesn't he unpack that, Charlie? I mean,
You want me to? Okay, I will.
yeah,
He
no, we
was
really should because I think it's such a thing that during COVID, I just want to say it just briefly and let you do your thing. The way insurance works, no hospital wants people to die within their four walls. And the way funding works, no one wants that. And so,
absolutely.
right? And so
Well, here's what happened during
what happened?
COVID and during the dark days of COVID. And my brothers, and he's a trauma specialist. He's certified in about 10 things, but trauma is one of his main things. In addition to being the chairman of medicine at Brooklyn Hospital, he runs the ICU, which is kind of the heartbeat of the hospital. That's where the sickest of sickos, and that's where everybody during COVID went because people were really sick and no one knew
Right.
how to deal with them, particularly people with comorbidities. I mean, heavy set people with asthma, people with diabetes, something like that. If you had cancer, COVID really hit you hard because, you have a weakened immune system for a lot of reasons. Okay. Mostly healthy people get through it. Okay. It depends on the viral load. My brother got it just from treating people. He got a bad viral load. It was bad for 3 days, wicked fevers, hallucinations, the whole thing. But, 4 days later, he had his voice back. A week, I think 10 days later, he was back in the hospital. So, but, that said, he's in amazing shape. But here's what my brother told me about this whole thing about Cuomo sending people back from hospitals to nursing homes. The hospitals demanded the state do it.
Right.
The hospital said we need these beds in the ICUs, which are being filled up with old people. And after we clear them, so what happened was the hospitals would clear them the best they could. Remember, it wasn't perfect back then. The testing wasn't perfect. So they would think, okay, we got this like 80-year-old guy with a comorbidity. He had COVID. He's here. He's stabilized. We're going to send him home. He's past that 10-day period. Remember, it was that 10-day incubation period, and they would send them back. And and then there would be a COVID outbreak in the nursing home because these are old people with comorbid. I mean, when you get to be 80 years old, you do get stuff,
Right.
even if you're healthy. I mean, you got other things, you might have high blood pressure. I mean, who knows? You might have stage 1 cancer. I mean, you don't know. That does happen to 80-year-old people, even though and by the way, they don't die, no, naturally for another 15 years. It just
Right.
happens. But if when you get COVID, your immune system is compromised, it hurts you. So Cuomo sent them back on the sort of demands of the hospital system.
Right.
Then it becomes an issue of, it came to the issue of how they were classifying those deaths and whether Cuomo hid the nursing home deaths by saying they were hospital deaths. So apparently, it's not his call to really say they were one or the other. It is literally a function of the way Medicare and Medicaid and these various social programs involving health insurance work. So if you come from a nursing home and you from the hospital and you die in a nursing home, sometimes, I mean, I think the whole thing was like he said they weren't nursing home deaths. He said they were hospital deaths, right?
Right.
Because that's how you're supposed to classify them because they came from the hospital. So theoretically, you got sick in the hospital, and then it's all that's why this was not Cuomo fudging the books.
Right.
In terms of his sexual harassment stuff, let's be real clear here. Go through the allegations. A lot of them were preposterous. Well, he looked at me a certain way. Well, he kissed me on the cheek. This is after you and I, this was before he and this woman took like a picture where they were hugging each other out. I mean, this was like crazy stuff in the
Why
context.
doesn't he just say what you're saying and just say it and just say,
Yeah, I don't know. I
understand the
don't
health
know.
system. If you understand the health system, this is what happened.
I understand, but just so you
Politics,
know,
it's dirty game, blah, blah, blah.
I've
Why doesn't he
said
say
that to
it?
his people, and they say we have said it, just doesn't catch
He
on.
doesn't.
I think well, maybe they're not saying it right, but I think it's so unfair that he gets nailed for that. Where I have a problem with him is he raised taxes at the end, did police reform, like bail reform, gave
Right.
in to the left on a lot of things. He should have allowed fracking, and he never said, "I'm sorry, I kind of went too far left. I was trying to appease the left, and I'm not going to ever do that again. I'm a moderate, and here's my bona fides." I think if he said that, he would have been run a much more effective campaign. And now, what he's left with, I think, in these last days, and the reason why most people are resigned to Mamdani winning, is I'm just not the commie Mamdani, and I just don't think it'll work. Even if Curtis, who's under tremendous pressure by everybody, by my newspaper, by his own boss, John Katzmatidis, a man that I greatly admire. He's a friend of mine. He wants Curtis to drop, and he's trying to do it in a very elegant and classy way. And if you read the headlines, Curtis quit ABC because he was on the air, said he'll never do it again. He feels like he's being betrayed. Um, I understand why they're doing this, but remember, you know, the alternative is somebody that just hasn't fessed up for what he's done wrong, and it's not the nursing home, and it's not stuff, and it's not the alleged, all that ridiculous sex harassment stuff. Which, by the way, he's never was convicted of a crime. The person that brought the case against him, the state report was maybe the most conflicted and I would say, corrupt prosecutors in the country. Someone named Tish James, the New York State Attorney General, who literally ran on prosecuting Donald Trump even before she had the evidence. And that's why it's my opinion she's corrupt. And then she went out and found the evidence, right? What was it? What was that thing from one of Stalin's henchmen? The guy.
Area,
What's that? Beria. What do you say?
area.
Find me the person, I'll get the
I
crime.
got
Something like
find me the
that.
person, I get the crime.
I
Exactly.
mean, it was just, and she did that. And then, there's been no criminal. It was referred criminally, and no one brought a case for obvious reasons. So his problems are different, and he hasn't been able to articulate, I think, a mid ground that would separate him out and say, and then would prove to Curtis voters like, your guy ain't going to do this. I'm going to do this, and so we can kind of have a real race. So that's why I think Wall Street is resigned to a Mamdani mayoralty. But we'll see. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe they're wrong, and maybe Cuomo pull it out of his hat, and maybe Curtis drops. It doesn't look like Curtis is dropping now. I think all this pressure on him is backfiring because he is a stubborn guy. But we'll see. Another thing I'm working on is the Warner Brothers Chronicles. It's like never. It's like a soap opera. When is David Zaslav of Warner Brothers going to sell to who? Amid this bid by, or uh, interest by Skydance, Paramount, CEO David Ellison, who's got money because his father, Larry Ellison, of co-founder of Oracle, is the second richest man in the world, worth $350 billion dollars, and he seemingly has his money backing him up. He's so here's what I have that no one else has. David Ellison has made 3 bids on privately. The last bid was at 23.50. He's been rebuffed each time by David Zaslav. They may bring their bid public, which would be a hostile bid. They're loath to go above $25 a share, which would be like a $70 billion deal, something like that, 60, $70 billion deal, because they believe that Zaslav at some point is going to have to hit their bid. He won't have. He says he has other suitors. They believe he doesn't. They believe that none of the other potential suitors, everybody from Comcast, who Trump loathes,
Yeah,
MSNBC,
sure.
NBC, that's run by Comcast. So he won't approve that deal. This is the betting inside Paramount Skydance. Netflix is the #1 streamer. They would be buying the #3 streamer. That's an antitrust problem. Amazon is interested, but guess what? They're under a consent decree from the Federal Trade Commission, which will be making getting bigger very difficult. So it's low odds, and that's what they're going to argue. If they do a public bid, watch the language in it when they go hostile. They're going to obviously appeal to shareholders and say, this is it. And if we back out, your stock, WBD stock, goes back down to 12. Now, Zaz believes that he's got other bidders. He believes it's a different regulatory environment. He thinks that Trump, it's interesting. Someone sent me a picture of Zaslav and Ivanka Trump hanging out together at Sun Valley. So who knows what
Who
he has? He's
knows?
just, by the way, Zaslav is a smart guy. I've known him for years. I worked with him when I was at CNBC. He was a honcho at NBC. He's a really smart guy, really nice guy, very shrewd. And by the way, Warner Brothers, after, yes, they had their issues early on. It's been a 2-year merger where they merged Discovery, which was his company, with Time Warner, which was owned by AT&T. They spun it out. He became the CEO. They now have the #1 studio, #3 streamer. Not a bad little business that he bought. And when he separates it out, he's separating this out into 2 companies: the cable channels like CNN and all that stuff over here, and over here they're going to have the streaming HBO and the studio. The HBO streaming studio is not going to have a lot of debt, so he thinks that if he can wait it out, he could get maybe $30 a share for just those. Jessica Reef, I think she used to be known as Jessica Reef Cohen. She's I don't want to mispronounce her new uh, last name, but she's at Bank of America. She thinks it's a $30 stock just the separated out part, just that studio and streaming part. So that's where we are right now. And, you know, this is a fast moving story. So just, keep looking at my Twitter feed and you'll get the updates. I'm actually reporting this real time. I have one other piece of breaking news. Bob and I, we're going to dinner tonight, and we're going to a place where I have a little poll. It's called the Ilios. It's the hottest ticket on town on Wednesday. A friend of ours who I invited, who said he couldn't make it, told me he was there Sunday. He will remain nameless until he approves us using it.
Yeah, that's an anonymous source for sure.
It's one of our anonymous sources. But he sent me pictures sitting at our table in the middle, like right in the front there, opposed across from the bar, is Tom Hanks, Larry David, and Paul McCarthy at our table. Can you believe that?
Well, I tell you what the solution is. We got to get a little brass plate, Charlie Gasparino, and just put it right there, just to remind people. First of all, those are not.
I'm sure Paul McCartney.
They're not real New Yorkers. They're Well, Larry David's a New Yorker, but he's
Larry David.
And you know what? By the way, he's a
Hanks,
genius.
maybe.
He's a genius. So we give him a little. It's okay. Larry David's a genius. But
I like his stuff. He's too liberal though for me.
Well, whatever. But he's still funny as hell. And at least he has a sense of humor, which most liberals don't. He has a real sense of humor, and I actually think I actually think he's more middle of the road. But he lives in an environment where he can't be. So, but I think Hanks and the Beatle. Who knows what the Beatle thinks? Hanks, very liberal. I think we gotta remind people who, when they're sitting at your table.
I'm gonna complain to management tonight.
Why don't we do that?
Well, Bob, I'll see you in a few.
Absolutely.
Thanks for tuning in for another riveting edition of Risk and Return. I'm Charlie Gasparino signing off with my partner, Bob Sloan. See you next week.
See you next week. And one other thing. In 2 weeks, we're going to do something live. We're going to drop that on Charlie's feed. We're going to open up to the world. And we're going to start answering questions live about data, breaking news, etc. We think it's going to be a lot of fun. We hope you'll tune in.
Yeah, and keep the obnoxious comments off.
Well, we'll deal with the good ones. At least the ones that are done with good humor. We'll probably entertain those.
You got it.